This episode of Untold Stories is sponsored by Kava. You'll hear more about them later on in this episode. What is up, everyone? I am Charlie Shrem, and you are listening and watching Untold Stories, where twice a week, together, we get to dive deep and talk to some of crypto's most influential leaders to find out how this movement truly came to be. And today, let's dive right in. I'm so excited today. We are with Alex Thorn, the head of firm-wide research at Galaxy Digital, a diversified financial services company operating in crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain. They've been around forever. And Alex, you've been around Bitcoin from the very beginning, doing a lot of different things. Really, even you're a self-proclaimed child of the internet, launching your own website in 1999, and it's cool because during the research, getting some information about you, it's cool to like be on that website. You have held really cool roles over the years, managing like technical investigations for compliance and litigation inquiries, an investor at Avon Ventures. Um, that was a parent company of Fidelity Investments, and you were the director of blockchain research at Fidelity Center for Applied Technology. Thank you so much for taking the time and coming on Untold Stories today.
Really happy to be here, Charlie. Yeah, very excited.
I love doing shows on the road. I feel like shows from the road. I'm here in Los Angeles. We're on Sunset Boulevard, Melrose Podcast Studio. I feel like doing shows on the road. You do a lot more research into it. You get to talk more of like things that are happening today. Bitcoin hitting, going back over $50,000. Visa buying their first NFT. Watching some of your tweets talking about how gold and Bitcoin are correlating so closely. There's so much kind of going on. There's so much. What are you working on right now?
Oh man, great question. There is a lot going on. We're doing a couple interesting things. We're building out a pretty big research function here at Galaxy. I can't talk too much about that yet because it's still in flux. But some things we're working on. We're doing a really big report on layer 2 networks. So we're going to cover all of them, all of the types of layer 2s, I should say, from state channels like Lightning and Raiden to rollups and even side chains. Even if technically they're not layer 2s, right? To really delve deep into how to scale blockchains and also ask the question: do they need to be scaled, and if so, how? And we're going to do a report that I swear everyone is going to be upset for me for, upset at me for. This has been attempted before. We're going to put our own attempt on it, quantifying layer 1 decentralization. I hope to even perhaps rank layer 1 blockchain networks by how decentralized they are. Not a simple task, unfortunately, but that's something we're working really hard on too. We got a bunch of other stuff in the pipeline. We're always following stable coins, Bitcoin, ETH.
No, that's brilliant. That's something that needs to be done. And personally, I've been trying to do that since the second blockchain ever came out, because very quickly, well, that you had the early not blockchains, but you had Ethereum, which was really the first one, but there were all the other Bitcoin forks. But very
Right.
quickly during those years, we started to realize that hey, decentralization is a path, and that every blockchain that chooses to be on that, with blockchain protocol, platform, whatever you want to call it, chooses to be on that path or not. Some of them choose to be fully centralized or permissioned. Those, for when it comes to compliance type blockchains or ones that only want specific permission parties to be involved in that, that's fine. But most of them are actually preaching this decentralization and governance, et cetera, et cetera. So what you're
Mhm.
talking about doing is actually be able to create a metric for how decentralized a blockchain is. Which one is going to be like the shining city on the hill? Will it be Bitcoin?
That's a great question. I think it's likely to be Bitcoin. I mean, we're going to look at this in across several different
Yeah, like
metrics,
through a
right? Yeah. And some of this we're still developing, and it's hard because different networks, it's not apples to apples, right? But we're going to look at things like how many nodes are there, how decentralized are those nodes, right? Or distributed is probably the better word. We'll look at the supply, right? How centralized is the supply? Does that matter? Certainly, in a proof of stake network, that matters more than a proof of work network.
yeah, of
And then
course.
some things you can't quantify really, but we're going to have to look at and come up with a judgment on, like how difficult or how much of the network needs to acquiesce to enact a hard fork, for example, right? We know on Bitcoin it's
Oh
extremely
yeah.
difficult, right? But on other networks it's not as difficult. How many validators need to collude in order to control or stop the network? Does that if it's 5 on one network and 5,000 on another, is that a direct comparison? We're going to have to hash some of this stuff out, right? Data is hard to find. And on some of these, we're going to have to crawl some of these networks and see what we can find, right? There isn't like a bitnodes or an ethernodes.org for like every single blockchain we want to cover. And even then, we want to build our own methodology. So,
There's also
um,
a huge like socioeconomic aspect to it too, because you'll have to war game different blockchains. There are a lot of the same people that have worked on multiple different coins and tokens. There's a lot of copying and pasting of code bases. There's a lot of very few people involved. So it may seem like there's 100 validators, but it's only run by 5 different companies or parent companies or
yeah.
whatever. So there's a lot of work to be done. Why is it important for like an investment perspective? I can see why I would want to do that from a ideological perspective. I want to always be just being involved in coins that are on that path to decentralization have a higher score. But from a, like Galaxy Digital, why from an
Mhm.
investment perspective does it matter?
It matters a lot. It matters because um, decentralization is an important, brings other features or other capabilities to a network. I mean, leaving the ideological stuff aside, of course, we want. I think many of us working in the space, right, and certainly at Galaxy, we're interested in these networks that can remove rent-seeking intermediaries that are highly resilient, are highly secure, right? And decentralization is an important piece of that. I think from an investor standpoint, just very directly, one thing that really matters is how secure the network is. And if the control of the network, to your point, Charlie, is in the hands of, ostensibly 100 parties, but actually it's only 5, right? Then collusion among those 5 could be pose a risk to the network, but also the assets that are carried on it. It also has an interesting regulatory component here, right? And we've heard that from the SEC, in Bill Himmon's speech about Ether. One of the main distinctions that he had made several years ago about why something could become not a security was its level of decentralization. Whether that thinking
I
holds up at the
remember that.
yeah, whether that
Didn't they
holds
give
up
a
on the
2 year?
regulatory agencies. Yeah, it was. Yeah, they sort of gave some leeway there. I don't know if that thinking is still sort of in play, but I think
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious that the more decentralized and truly distributed something is, the smaller the regulatory attack surface is as well.
In traditional like in stocks and equities, when you're doing research, when it comes to regulations, when it comes to compliance, there's no like intention matters, of course, but at the end of the day, it's the facts and the figures. Here though, what we're talking about is intention, cuz like how do you define the intention to be fully decentralized within 2 years? Like we have a mainnet launching in a year and a half, some of them will say. How do you quantify that? It's a very complicated thing.
Yeah, and it's different for each network. And I just think the obvious thing here, though, is that the more distributed a network is, right, the harder it is to shut down, whether by
Sure.
mistake or by attack. Remember the debate used to be a lot about state level attack versus platform resistant, right? Are you building something that developers can build on and know that Apple won't rug pull them with changes to the terms of service? That was one view, right? Or are you building something that, say, the US government, if it marshaled its resources, wouldn't be able to shut down? There's obviously a diverging views among both developers of these networks and investors in these networks as to what is important and for what use case and when. I think our goal is to just try to highlight that there are differences. If you take something like Binance Smart Chain and compare it to Ethereum, which a lot of people were doing several months ago, it's quite obvious that Ethereum is more decentralized than BSC. But it's if you really look at it, right? But are investors aware of that? I think it's something that people should take into account as they look at these networks, especially because a big part of the value proposition here is
Yeah.
decentralization.
Who would have thought that the roles that you and I have where we have to just spend out copious amounts of hours in chat rooms and on Reddit investigating different blockchains, where like that would be our job, become understanding the nuances. I sit in some of my research meetings and I'll say like, what do you guys need from me this week? And they just said, just go do you, Charlie. Go do you, talk to people, read, understand things, and then come back to us every week and explain to us what's going on. And it's great. I love my job.
Yeah. I love it too. And I just it's been I feel fortunate to be able to work on such an
Yeah, you
interesting and
work at a
disruptive space.
You work at a great company too, Galaxy. We were saying earlier, some like Galaxy Mike has managed to bring on all of the OGs over the years. We're like the brilliant people between all of my friends from the early days. I don't want to name drop people, but you and I have so many common friends, and it's really great to see that you guys still are kind of like allowed to go out and do what you want to do and investigate and be a part of the community. And at the same time, like this is now, like this is the institutionalization of the crypto space. Here we are.
It's been crazy to watch. It must be mind blowing for someone like you that's been really deep into it for so long. Coming from Bit Instant all the way to where we are today, the market has matured so
I know.
significantly. The market infrastructure is incredibly mature by comparison, even to just 2017. I remember it was hard to there was no settlement, there were no non-exchange brokerages really in 17. There wasn't really any lending really that could happen in 17.
So
Right
many
now we have
business models I missed, like just custody, so many over the years, like it, but I'm happy because I realize that I'm not the best CEO, so better let everyone else run these companies than me.
I learned when I did venture in the space that I might not be, well, I don't know. I've never actually tried to be a CEO myself, but it's hard. And some of the
Yeah.
folks we met and also invested in are absolutely brilliant. And there's a difference between being really smart or understanding the space really well and then being a great operator. And but just think about how many talented operators have entered the space, right? I feel like with every wave of with every cycle and every bull market in Bitcoin and crypto, obviously you have a whole bunch of new investors that come in, but some subset of those, they're not just speculating; they end up staying and stacking Sats, right, for years after. But then a subset of those people are entrepreneurs who identify these market gaps. And that was the big story to me between 17 and
Yeah.
2020 was these big companies that are now huge, right? And not all of them for the first time really are just exchanges, right? For so long, it was just exchanges and like Bitcoin mining manufacturing companies that were super valuable. But now we have lending, brokerage,
Yeah.
like
It's
settlement
insane.
companies. Yeah,
Complete credit and capital markets we have. It's like being rebuilt. The Lego bricks are automatically rebuilding themselves on the other side in this whole new financial system, and it allows for anyone who has just says I want to be a part of it to come in. And there's so much to do. We have more things to do and products to build than we have people to do it. Do actually I was reading your Twitter today, and it's funny because Justin Sun just bought like a pet rock for like $500,000 on
yeah,
Ether Rock, and you tweeted that. I remember when people would call Bitcoin the pet rock. And I remember that too. Like, oh, this is gonna go the ways of the Tamagotchi or the pet rock.
right, right.
What do you think? Where are we right now and all that? Do you see the same parallels of like the early days on the internet as well? The same types of people and everything that are happening?
Yeah, in some ways yes, and in some ways no. I mean, obviously you have these are internet protocols. There is, in some cases really interesting but still immature uses. I mean, EtherRocks is a great example, right? One of the earliest NFT projects, certainly on ETH. And silly, right? I mean, just it's the
Yeah.
baseline of like, let's make a randomized looking thing and use the functionality that a non-fungible token gives us to show that. Um, Really a proof of concept, if you ask me, is what ether rocks are, right? So in that sense, it is similar, right? You started out with web pages with don't go back on the Wayback Machine all the way back on alexthorn.com, see how far you can go back. But there's going to be like gifs at some point. I'm just like putting a
Oh
gif on
yeah.
the homepage, right? I'm just messing around. What's proof of concept? So there is a lot
Autoplay
of that.
music.
Yeah, exactly. I had Flash videos I had made. I got really
Yeah.
good with macro media Flash animations. So we are kind of in that era still. So yes, but on the flip side, like this is protocols that people can speculate on, and that we didn't have. You couldn't buy tokens for the internet. You couldn't buy if you were a fan of say like SSL or something is the new encryption protocol for internet commerce. You couldn't buy like the SSL token and speculate that it would win. And in that today you can with these crypto networks. And that is, I mean, that's kind of a game changer. I think that's why it really is an evolution of the internet and not just sort of repeating the cycle.
So you're saying that really people have to, it's worth for everyone to understand this. It's worth it for everyone to understand what's going on and be the most like in-depth, deep person in ether rocks or NFTs or whatever it is, because while many of these things are going to be fast and loose for an investing things, and as an investing thesis, like I know I was a first mover with Bitcoin as you were, but as other things are now, I'm like a slow mover. I just bought my first NFT last 2 weeks ago. or whatever. And NFTs have been around for what, a year? So you don't always have to, you know, invest or buy or speculate on things in order to have the wanting to understand them. And I think that's a very, very important thing because just like you and I are talking, research, there's a whole business model right there when it comes to just research.
Yeah, you're totally right. There's so much to learn. I'm not a big trader. I tried to trade Bitcoin years ago, and in the end, I
Yeah,
sold a lot
that
of
it too.
Bitcoin. sold a ton of Bitcoin. It was a good trade at the time, but I obviously regret that. And I'm personally not really a trader, right? So even on the speculation side, I think one of the innovations is that you can speculate on the future of the internet, and that's crazy. But to your point about ether rocks, I mean, for NFTs, I think the design space is huge, and I think we could have, the idea of it's digital scarcity plus, right? I mean, it's not money, so it can't be fungible, but you could have things like identity, obviously property. People have wanted to do this for so long, right? Remember the
Yeah.
2017 to like 2019, there was going to be
How
stocks and real estate on the blockchain with tokens. Um, we
yes.
just Yeah, we haven't seen that literally take off, but we are now seeing that people really realize the value in
Yeah.
yeah, uniqueness. And that is a proof of concept that could be valuable. I mean, think about domain names. Domain names are NFTs by definition. And what's going to be the next? Are we going to bring what are we going to bring in from meat space onto the blockchain here now that NFTs are widely understood? And I think it's going to be a lot. Doesn't mean that digital art and collectibles aren't
Yeah.
also going to be huge. I think they are going to be huge. They are huge already. But I'm really excited for what comes next with NFTs.
You're speaking my friend Drew's language. He's like the domain Sherpa, and he's been trying to get domains since, he's been trying to get domains on the Bitcoin blockchain since like 2012. Like
Yeah.
he's been trying to Namecoin. He wasn't involved in that project, but he's like huge domain broker. He was involved in the Bitcoin.com buy and sell, like BitcoinWallet.com and
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. But it's so interesting. However, this is what I need to, and I don't know what the answer is because this is something that I think that the NFT or non fungible token market needs to figure out is how do you have price discovery without an actual transaction?
It's not. It's the liquidity and the price discovery are problematic today. Obviously there's some interesting projects doing fractionalized ownership of NFTs. Some DAOs are supporting this, right? Maybe something along those lines, right? You can see if this DAO owns 50% CryptoPunks or something, and someone bought a share of the DAO for this price. Maybe you can extrapolate back, but
How is that
that
not a
is a
security? If I own an NFT and then I issue like pieces of it, you got
yeah
it's our community moves faster than
yeah.
anything can allow. It's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
no, there's a
insane.
lot of big questions there. I think if you
I'm
remember,
sweating.
I know one of the only like comprehensive things the SEC has ever said about crypto was the DAO report they put out
Yeah.
on Ethereum's original DAO, which they said was definitively a security. That doesn't look a lot different than a lot of the DAOs we see today. So I'm not sure how that shakes out. But yeah, your question about price discovery, this is a problem that exists in art, right? I mean, I'm sitting in one of Novo's offices. He's got a bunch of art in here. These things, no one knows what these things are worth, right? We maybe know what they last traded for, just like we do on OpenSea
Exactly.
today, but we don't know what they're worth. I don't
Or
know.
like the bids or the offers, but even the transactions could be just someone moving it from one of their accounts, consolidating it into another account.
Yeah, I mean that's for on-chain analytics. That's always a problem. I we spend a lot of time looking on chain, not just for NFTs, obviously for everything.
Sure.
It's seeing what we can see, and you just have to be cautious with assumptions. I think a lot of people get a lot of mileage on social media, talking about on-chain analytics and even ascribing fundamental value to the analytics they can derive. And I think that space is a lot more nascent than people realize. I think there's a lot of alpha to be gleaned from looking on chain, but you got to be very cautious. Yeah, I don't know on NFTs though.
Yeah.
That's something we have to figure out. If they can't trade in a live market, there's only one of them. You know.
Yeah, that's the most difficult. That's the most difficult thing. It's price discovery, but I'm sure I think it'll be figured out. And once that's figured out, then I think you'll see a lot more people move their potential real estate and tokenize it because I think the tokenization of real estate, buildings, businesses, so many businesses that can be tokenized. I think what it comes down to is if you can figure out a way to have price discovery without having to have a transaction, more people would be willing to tokenize their real estate because then they have the
Yeah.
potential of being able to sell it or something.
Something maybe with zero knowledge proofs where you could
Yeah,
submit sealed bids
that could
to
work
the
too.
asset owner or something, because you also don't necessarily want, you either as the bidder or as the owner necessarily want that stuff visible until the transaction occurs, right? So maybe something with like zero knowledge proofs or some kind of homomorphic encryption.
I wanted to congratulate our sponsor Kava because Circle chose the Kava platform as one of their newest blockchains and protocols they're going to be launching USDC on. Traditionally, USDC has only been on Ethereum and one or two other chains like Tron, but now there's a bunch of other blockchains. The Kava platform is one of them, and you can access all of those super cool DeFi high yield opportunities that are on the Kava platform now with USDC, which we know and love. So check them out at untoldstories.link/Kava. And congratulations, guys. Having Circle choose y'all as the top blockchain for USDC to be launched on is a big freaking deal.
One of the points that I wanted to get across, as we are where we are on the show right now, is that my listeners know, they know that how important this stuff is, but they're talking to their friends and their family, and people are scoffing at NFTs, at a lot of what's going on in the crypto world today. They're scoffing at it because we don't, our community, we don't take ourselves very seriously. So we're on crypto Twitter, we're on social media, and we're joking around. Justin's son is joking around about the pet rock, where we have to be poking at each other. The day we make ourselves too serious, the day we take ourselves too seriously, I think is when we start failing as a community. And so, because we don't take ourselves too seriously, even at a very professional scale, a lot of the mainstream media won't take us seriously, and therefore our friends and family won't take us seriously, and then we won't talk about these things with them. That's a wrong idea, because they are going to miss out, and they're going to blame you for missing out because they blame you for missing out on Bitcoin and everything else.
It's hard to take something like Ether Rocks or even Pudgy Penguins and these funny projects that are fun and funny. They're genuinely funny, and they're cool, but they're powerful. At least what they represent, right? The future that becomes possible, or Bitcoin, right? I mean, Bitcoin in particular to me is dear to my heart. And you talk about people are buying stuff with pennies over Lightning Network, and they're like, oh great, I've had critics say like, what
Yeah.
do I need to buy? I don't buy anything that's worth a penny. Why do I care, right? And it's like, well, if we start talking about streaming money, right, we start talking about international payments with essentially no fees. That's the way that you can get through to these folks. If you talk about NFTs as, look at that deed to your house, look at that contract you just signed with your lawyer or your vendor, right? What if those things can be, not only recorded immutably and stored and tracked, right? But what if they can be swapped, right? And
The
these types of
token
things.
becomes an asset in and of itself. I was trying to explain. So, like, my brother-in-law owns a painting business, and he's got dozens of contracts coming in all the time. He'll have monthly contracts with people. What if
Right.
all of those contracts could become tokenized in and of itself, and they become the asset? So you have this 10-year business that it seems to have no value because it's only brought in as much value as you live off of it. It's an owner operator business type of thing. But if you can create assets now out of a untokenizable business before, I mean, that's freaking powerful.
Yeah, and you can like show and prove that business's future value,
You can get a
right? So
mortgage
from
out of that.
exactly credit, exactly. And then also just again the decentralized concept of this too. We're going through. Let's say I have this future value in my business, and I maybe want to sell it, my personal business, as you mentioned. I'm gonna have to get like an auditor or somebody to come in and show and attest that I have these things lined up, these future engagements. Whereas today with NFTs or any kind of peer-to-peer transparent ledger, we could just prove it like casually that like I
Exactly.
have this business lined up. I think it's hard to see
Casually.
a future. Yeah, I think it's hard to foresee a future where humanity in general it has been highly successful, where we don't have the ability to seamlessly interact with each other without an intermediary. To me, that's a hard pill to
It's a hard
swallow. That
sell. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's another way I always think about this is like, let's say, Elon is right. We become an interplanetary species. I think a lot of folks in the long run for humanity think that, and not just for humanity, for any species floating on a rock in space, right? That's a liability. You only got one home, right? An asteroid or something. if we're going to expand beyond, let's imagine that we're an
Oh, you're
interstellar
right.
species.
Yeah.
How do we really think that we're going to be like living on, a moon orbiting, like, living on Triton or something? And when we need to, like, transact, that they're going to like send a radio wave down to the New York Fed is crazy, right? That
It's a
stuff's
good
all going to
point.
be peer to peer. Yeah, it's to me, it seems like I played Civilization a lot growing up, that game, and it seems like a very clear rung on like the technological advancement of civilization, that we adopt this ability to transact peer to peer. And that includes, like you said, I mean, with contracts with each other.
That's where aliens come from. In hundreds of years from now, when we are living like humans are living on multiple planets, when you have multiple generations, just like two or three, the children born on the other planet 3 generations later are going to be completely different human beings. We may not even be called humans than the ones maybe born on Earth or another planet that we're living on. How it's a scary thing to think about, but it's going to happen.
And this just seems like core tech to help get us there.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
like, I don't see how we just won't be advanced. This is crazy.
So
There are so many interactions that, where if we had the ability to do it peer to peer, we would have, right? And so many of the centralized intermediaries that we have today were born out of the lack of ability to do what we wanted in a peer to peer fashion. But I think we increasingly have those abilities, so it's time to start using them.
everything we know about humanity and how we act and react and treat each other and act towards each other, we've known for hundreds, thousands, for since the beginning of time, human interaction has been studied. And what we know about people is that monetary gain and social validation are the two probably biggest incentivization, incentivizing greed and not wanting to be buried in a grave alone. Are probably the two most powerful motivators for humankind forever. So the biggest elephant in the room that I kind of want to understand, and I don't know if you've thought about this, is what will it mean? What does it mean for the world, and kind of why no one's talking about it? The fact that you have this guy named Satoshi, an anonymous coder who never actually attempted or has realized the gain, not just the monetary gain, but also the social clout gain from this whole thing. How do we, like, as humankind, how do we rationalize that so we can then be comfortable with this thing for then hundreds of years to come?
That's what makes Bitcoin so metal, right? I mean, that's what's so crazy. It's a sci-fi writer's dream.
This
It's I don't understand. You're right. I think it's a phenomenally interesting question, because it's so, to your point, outside the norms of human behavior to do what Satoshi did. But I am a firm believer that it's also one of the things that gives Bitcoin so much value, and it's also something that can't be repeated. Where Bitcoin, no one could ever have as true and fair a launch as Bitcoin. I look, if
yeah.
I think I'm firmly in the camp that if Satoshi returns, that's, you know, I don't even forget even bearish for Bitcoin's price in dollar terms. That's just bad, right?
For
This is like,
the whole experiment, yeah, the whole social
yeah.
experiment goes away.
I mean,
Yeah,
literally, if you had written this like
there's no
20 years
point.
ago as a sci-fi story, this would be a banger. Like, this is a epic
Oh
sci-fi
my god.
tale.
You're right. Like, I bet you Neil Stephenson's like, "Why didn't I think of this? I thought of
Yeah,
everything else, but I've not thought
yeah.
of this one."
I'm thinking about like Ender's Game and that series. I really loved, and this again, it just feels like it's really futuristic. A person on the internet
So
did this anonymously.
yeah, I've thought about it, and I really think that you can have so many answers, but if you just take the answer that it was a dozen of brilliant minds and thinkers who potentially realized that they could create something great, but the only way to do and, like, there was such a need for humankind. How did the folks or the one person who Satoshi the group, how did they realize that humanity is going it was at like at a runway of needing cryptocurrency or just needing a solution to the Byzantine general's problem because we had the internet for so long, but it seemed like we were plateauing with what we could do on the internet. It seemed like Web3 was never coming. And it wasn't until blockchain technology, Bitcoin, Byzantine general's problem was solved in 2008. That's when we could get to that next level. I just can't fathom that.
I know, it seems like too brilliant to really be possible. It's
Yeah.
like one of these breakthroughs. Part of me, I always like the idea that you may have heard this, but like agriculture was like discovered simultaneously all around the world, by civilizations that weren't in contact with each other, right? And
Really?
it's I've
I've
heard
heard
that.
this, something like this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But these advancements often just sort of like they come, and obviously we know, Satoshi didn't build Bitcoin in a vacuum, right? There's decades of work that went into that. He or she built on top of it, right? We've got everything back to DigiCash and
It
Equals,
was really an
Bitbull, and all
amalgamation
that
of
stuff.
so many different things over the
It
years.
was
Yeah.
right, reusable proofs of work and Hashcash and all that stuff. So it wasn't in a box, but you're right. It's at some point. It was at a perfect time, a time when banking was, one of the least trusted institutions in the world. It had, many had viewed, the Great Recession as being caused by the failures of centralized intermediaries.
It's
It's
crazy. I know.
it is. It's too beautiful. The timing and the innovation. I mean, it's just so massive. So routinely blows my mind, and I've been looking at it for years.
What should the listeners be looking at right now? What are you studying? What are you spending the most time
Yeah.
on when it comes to your like medium term research?
Oh man. We're still looking a lot at Bitcoin adoption. That's one thing I think a lot of people are writing off because of the really fascinating and innovative capitalism and capitalist structures that are being developed on other networks, which we're looking at also. But I don't sleep on Bitcoin. I think we have a long road ahead of us for Bitcoin
Oh yeah.
adoption. And that includes through things like the Lightning Network. I hope it will include things like DeFi on Bitcoin, um, which I think could be really powerful. So we spend a lot of time on Bitcoin still. I know, but we spend a ton of time on DeFi broadly, include particularly on Ethereum, but also on other networks. We spend a lot of time contemplating the demands and realities of what a multi-chain world looks like.
That's what I
Um,
spend time figuring out too. I'm trying to figure that out as well. What are the demands and needs for those
Yeah,
for
I mean,
yeah.
especially with like cross-chain bridges, L1s and L2s, I think bridges between L2s, it's not clear what that topography or topology is going to look like. But I think it is increasingly likely that there is a long-term multi-chain world here. Um, I'm just trying to, some of my Bitcoiner friends will
Sure.
be upset with me for saying that, but I mean, the reality
No, it's
is the
fine.
reality. And I think we'll see a lot of value accrue at the sort of bridges between networks is an interesting area to watch, um, because this is one area where Ethereum has such an advantage, right? Most of the assets people want in the crypto world are on Ethereum. So we've
Yeah, and
seen
then they
so
won't
many layer
move.
ones then bridge those, right? Or so instead they basically get copied, right? Like so you make a wrapped version of some ERC20 token and put it on, Solana or something like that. That's increasingly happening. And another important thing too, this goes along with the Bitcoin adoption and this other point about L1s and bridges is it's getting easier to use. Bitcoin wallets are easier to
It
use.
is.
Yeah, and even like MetaMask, it's not even the only one. You've got Phantom, you've got all these other like in-browser wallets that are easier to use. I love the concept of the countless internet, right? So we call it like a crypto single sign-on, right? I don't want to have to give all my information. Just let me sign a message, and
Yeah, and
and
actually that's what I was talking we had a Lightning developer on the show recently and he was telling me that well, and actually there's a great metric just I tweeted this morning that 70% of the Bitcoin has not moved in the last 6 months. And that kind of validates what we talked about. I talked with him about last week was that um most people, not most people, but a lot of people don't want to move their Bitcoin, but they want to be able to do stuff with their Bitcoin without having to move it.
yep, yeah, locking it up in an escrow and using it on Lightning is a
Yes.
is a is a great idea. I think. Look, I mean, Bitcoiners, rightly so, are incredibly risk averse with their coins, and they
We don't
and with
want to
the net
use Bitcoin as gas on a system. I don't want to
and we
give up
don't
Bitcoin as no.
yeah, and we don't want to bog down our network with like smart contracts and stuff that like an EVM, like right. I think there's a good
Exactly.
differentiation. I love all the innovation happening like on EVM chains, right? And like that I was just saying the most interesting thing to me is the innovative capitalism happening on those networks. But what I also love is that we've seen a real differentiation emerge from Bitcoin's approach to these other networks'
Yes,
approaches. And
exactly.
and I choose Bitcoin for a lot of these things, right? Like, I mean, I love Bitcoin. Bitcoin shouldn't add these features at the base layer, but that doesn't mean we don't want to use it for something. And that's why I've loved the Lightning Network's gone completely parabolic. I mean, it's like up I don't call it this, but let's use common terminology, right? The total value locked on Lightning of Bitcoin, Bitcoin locked in publicly visible channels is through the roof over the last 2 months, even. I think if we can get things like RGB on Lightning, to let us put tokens on Lightning, I think if you had a stable coin on Lightning, if you couple something like Lightning with discrete log contracts, there's some really good developers working on DLCs. You start to see a truly Bitcoin native DeFi come forward. And again, it's just Bitcoin. It's locked on chain. It's nice and safe there.
That's the approach. That's the
Yeah.
approach. Instead of starting another blockchain with another token, Bitcoin's approach was, so the way we're looking at Lightning is actually maybe a little bit, I was looking at it wrong the whole time. It's not like a Lightning network, it's a Lightning ecosystem. There are dozens of companies and projects working on different variations of the Lightning protocol, if you will. So it's not
Right.
just like one, it's multiple. So that the ecosystem model, kind of like what Cosmos is following, or some of the other ones, Kava or whatever, like where you have multiple chains on top of one. I'm using other, Ethereum related blockchains as examples, but and I think the smart scaling, to wrapping it all up, is better than fast scaling. This is proving to be the best system, the best way to do it, because you're not touching on-chain Bitcoin except for maybe locking it, unlocking it, escrowing, making Bitcoin like a self-sovereign contract in and of itself, or moving it into something like that. That could be really cool. But that's about it. I don't want anything else. That's my favorite thing. I don't want to track the updates on the Bitcoin code base. I want there to be no updates. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say no updates, but I totally agree. I mean, we want to take this thing. Bitcoin is the ironclad chain. It's obviously the original chain, right?
OG.
It's the canonical chain for a digital ledger. I mean, guys, we can track the Ethereum ICO on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? It all starts.
Oh my God, yeah,
Bitcoin.
I forgot about that. That's so crazy.
Yeah,
You're right.
It was Bitcoin, right? So
the genesis of Ethereum was on Bitcoin.
Yeah, and so it all goes back to Bitcoin, but that's also why it's so important that we don't want to move fast and break things with Bitcoin. I mean, I think that's the differentiator, right? There's no backwards compatible non-backwards compatible upgrades, right? No hard forks. I think is a powerful ethos. Now, whether the Bitcoin community can hold to that forever remains to be seen. But I love that that's the view, right? That make this thing like bomb proof. Like, let's not have other networks say how much this. When we go back to this decentralization question, right? They say we think there's some amount of decentralization that's enough, right? Theoretically, we could say we want minimal viable decentralization. That's the view a lot of these networks take in order to add other features like higher throughput or whatever. And the problem is you don't know how much you need. And when you follow Bitcoin development, what you find is that not only the developers but the community, basically the view is if this upgrade has any centralizing force at all, it should be rejected. So every upgrade is to make Bitcoin more resilient and more decentralized. We don't know how much we need, so let's push for as much as possible. Compare that to other networks where it's right. Oh, we probably don't need that much. Let's just go, which is fine. I like that differentiation, but that's what makes Bitcoin so unique in this regard. I just would like to see more things like Lightning. You've got RSK. There's people building in that sort of Bitcoin, like whether it's layer 2 or sidechain ecosystem that lets you do more stuff. But I also will point out there's a lot more you can do with your Bitcoin than people realize with things like DLCs.
You need immutability. Vaults. It matters. You need 100% decentralization. And my wife and I were just watching a TV show the other night, like it was like Outer Banks on Netflix. It's the stupidest show, but most stupid.
I watched it.
It's a great show. But the whole something rung on me about it. They were testing the gold, and in the grungiest of little like pawn shops on an island in the middle of nowhere, you can check if this gold is real by doing a simple acid test. And Bitcoin is the same way. 100% when it hits that first confirmation. You could be in the middle of nowhere, anywhere, satellite, pigeon, doesn't matter. That matters. With a lot of these other blockchains that are still on that path, you can't trust it 100%.
That's
and
right.
You remove that, it's like,
That's what's so powerful. I mean, that's what really boggles the mind is the permanence of Bitcoin, right? The hardness, let alone you throw in things like, we haven't even talked about
Yeah.
its monetary policy or anything like that, which I'm not saying we have to. I'm just saying the network, it's so resilient, it's so permanent, it's like a giant stone tablet in the best way possible, right? Which is what I love about it. It's you can trust it. And I know I don't, we're using the word trust. Okay, people, like, we don't mean like trust. You don't have
Sure.
to trust it, right? But it's that it's up, that it can run with. I mean, think about the China ban that happened. I mean, this mass exodus of hash rate. This could go down.
They
I think
actually
is one of
banned what they could have banned too. It's like we always
yeah,
said, the way they could actually ban it is by kicking out all the miners or whatever.
right.
And they actually did it, but nothing happened. I mean, like
No,
the price
nothing
and the
happened.
hash rate, yeah. But
No, I mean nothing happened. I mean this could go down as one of the largest. Assuming we start to see, and we have started to see some of that hash rate relocate to other jurisdictions, it'll go down as one of the largest like industrial migrations in world history.
yeah,
With its underlying product completely
my
unaffected.
friends in China told me that they think it happened privately because China actually owns a lot of Bitcoin and they wanted to hedge their role as a superpower. They didn't want
That
this Bitcoin to be seen as like a China thing because they own so much of it.
Yeah, I like the idea that China controls Bitcoin. Well, now not only don't they
Not
control it,
anymore.
yeah,
I love it.
yeah, they no longer control it, even though they never controlled it. But now they not only that, they could do the worst thing that they could do, to your point, and have it and not hurt Bitcoin. I mean, that's the difficulty adjustment for you. It's a beautiful thing.
Alex Thorn, thank you so much for coming on Untold Stories today. That's all the time we have. You're the head of firm-wide research at Galaxy Digital, a publicly traded financial services company, investing, doing so many things for so many years. Thank you for taking the time. This has been so much fun, and I can't wait to talk again, to have you back on and to talk about monetary policy and so many other things.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Really enjoyed being here.
See you later. Thank you.